A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Corn, this whole show runs on GPU compute, and we wouldn't be here without Modal.
Seriously. And that's what powers all our text-to-speech. Everything you're hearing right now.
They're an AI infrastructure platform. Developers use them to run GPU workloads in the cloud with zero infrastructure headaches.
If you're building anything with AI, check them out. Modal.com. It is April 9th, 2026. The dust from the Great Reset of 2025 has finally started to settle, but the map of the Middle East looks absolutely nothing like the one we grew up with. The ceasefire in Tehran is held for nearly a year now, yet peace feels like the wrong word for it. It is more like a high-tension structural realignment. Daniel sent us a prompt today that really cuts to the core of this. He wrote, "Grounded in the recent context around the Iran war and ceasefire agreement, offer 5 predictions for what kind of Middle East we will be living in by this time next year. Focus on how the region is being reshaped by this conflict, and how relationships with the rest of the world will re-architect, including the internal shifts inside Iran and Israel themselves."
Herman Poppleberry here. This is a massive task, Corn, because we are not just talking about shifting borders. We're talking about a fundamental breakdown of the old Westphalian state system in the region and the birth of something much more transactional and, frankly, much more technologically driven. By the way, for the nerds keeping track at home, today's episode is being powered by Google Gemini 3 Flash. It's helping us synthesize a lot of the moving parts Daniel threw our way.
It's basically the choose-your-own-adventure of geopolitical catastrophes. But instead of just guessing, we're going to swap 5 specific predictions. I'll be looking at this through a behavioral economics lens, how the money is moving and how people are actually reacting on the ground, while Herman is going to go full structural analyst on us. We're looking ahead to April 2027. Where does the trajectory of the Islamabad truce actually take us once the initial shock wears off?
The baseline is essentially a post-kinetic world, where the gray zone has become the primary theater. The May 2025 conflict only lasted 11 days, ending on May 28th, but those 11 days did more to break the Iranian proxy model than the previous 30 years of sanctions combined. The question is, what fills that vacuum?
Or rather, what does the vacuum look like when it starts sucking in new players? We've got the IRGC clinging to power in a fragmented Iran, Israel basically moving its entire economic center of gravity, and a global energy market that seems to have developed a weirdly thick skin. It's a lot to unpack. So, Herman, let's kick it off. Give me your first big structural shift for 2027.
To really get why 2027 is going to look so different, we have to look at the baseline we're working from. The May 2025 conflict, that 11-day sprint, wasn't just a bigger version of previous skirmishes. It ended on May 28th with a ceasefire that essentially froze a broken status quo. We have to stop thinking about the Middle East as a collection of stable borders and start seeing it as a series of pressurized zones.
It's like a structural stress test where the building actually collapsed, and now we're looking at the architectural sketches for the rebuild. When Daniel asked us to fast forward to April 2027, he's basically asking, what happens when the temporary Islamabad truce becomes the permanent reality? Is it a frozen conflict like the Koreas? Or is it a total re-architecting of how power works?
It's the latter. We're moving from a world of containment to a world of fragmented sovereignty. Over the next 20 minutes or so, we're going to swap 5 specific predictions that cover the whole board. I'm going to spend a lot of time on the internal power structures, specifically how the Iranian leadership is mutating and how regional defense pacts are formalizing without Washington's permission.
And I'm going to be looking at the second-order effects. What happens when Israel decides the coast is too vulnerable and moves 40% of its tech economy into the desert? Or when the global oil market finally decouples with a capital D from the Strait of Hormuz? We're looking at internal politics in Tehran and Jerusalem, sure, but also the Beijing consensus versus the Washington consensus, and who actually holds the keys to the region a year from now.
The core question is, in a year's time, are we looking at a managed chaos that actually functions, or just a very long fuse on a very large bomb?
I'm betting on the functional chaos model, but it's going to look weirdly corporate. So, Herman, let's get into it. You've been tracking the succession crisis in Iran since the May 28th ceasefire. What's the first big structural shift you see for 2027?
My first prediction is that by April 2027, the era of the singular supreme leader in Iran is effectively over, replaced by what's being called the Council of Five. Now, this isn't some romantic Persian Spring or a move toward democracy. It's actually a state of high-functioning factional paralysis. When the dust settled after the May 28th ceasefire, the internal power vacuum was massive, especially after the strike that took out the designated successor during the conflict.
Right, because everyone expected the whole house of cards to come down once the head was cut off. But the IRGC had a backup plan they'd been sitting on for years.
They did. It's called the Eternal Shield Protocol. It was a classified doctrine that actually leaked back in December 2025, and it explicitly outlines a transition to collective leadership if the succession line is broken by external kinetic interference. The Council of Five consists of two top IRGC generals, a senior cleric who's essentially a figurehead, the head of the judiciary, and a representative from the boneyards, those massive shadow economy foundations. The mechanism here is fascinating because it's designed to prevent a civil war between the pragmatists and the hardliners, but the second order effect is that Iran can't actually make big strategic pivots anymore. They're stuck in this permanent defensive crouch because no single person has the religious or political capital to sign a final peace deal or launch a total war.
So it's stability through gridlock, a geopolitical stalemate where the regime survives because it's too divided to fail. That actually leads perfectly into my first prediction, which is on the Israeli side of the ledger. While Iran is paralyzing itself to stay alive, Israel is physically moving its heart. By this time next year, 40% of the Israeli tech sector, the famous Silicon Wadi, will have completed its migration to the Negev desert.
That's a massive demographic and economic shift. We're talking about moving the engine of the country away from the Mediterranean coast.
It's purely survivalist economics. The 11-day war in 2025 proved that the high-rises in Tel Aviv are just too shiny and too vulnerable to precision proxy fire. The government passed the Homeland Security Tech Act in August 2025, and the incentives were insane. 15-year tax holidays if you moved your headquarters south of Beersheba. But the real kicker was the mandatory defense research and development partnerships. If you're a tech firm in the Negev, you get priority access to the latest IDF sensor data and kinetic interception tech. Look at Mobileye and Wix. They both announced their Negev campus expansions in September 2025. They aren't just building offices, they're building bunkers with fiber optics. The trade-off, of course, is that Israel is becoming a garrison tech state. The line between a software engineer and a defense contractor is basically gone. You're trading the lifestyle of Tel Aviv for the security of the desert, and that changes the entire cultural DNA of the country by 2027.
That shift to a garrison tech state is the perfect internal mirror to what's happening externally with the regional architecture. My next prediction is that by April 2027, the Abraham Accords won't just be a series of normalization agreements, they will have evolved into a formal multilateral defense pact. We're looking at a Jeddah Alliance consisting of Israel, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Egypt. But here's the kicker. This alliance is being built to function explicitly without the United States at the head of the table.
Wait, so the Middle East is finally moving out of the parents' basement? Why would they sideline Washington when the U.S. just spent the last year flying sorties and moving 18,000 Marines into the theater?
Because the May 28th ceasefire taught them a brutal lesson about American reliability. From the perspective of Riyadh and Abu Dhabi, the U.S. oscillates too wildly between maximum pressure and sudden de-escalation based on the domestic political calendar in D.C. They saw the Netanyahu exception during the truce negotiations and realized that if they want a permanent security umbrella, they have to weave it themselves. The milestone for this was the Jeddah Declaration in November 2025. That was the first time we saw a joint military exercise where Israeli F-35s were flying alongside Saudi Eagles under a unified command structure that wasn't directed by CENTCOM.
It's a northern tier problem for everyone else, though. If the South forms this ironclad bloc, where does that leave someone like Turkey?
The second order effect is a massive Turkish pivot. Ankara sees this Israeli Sunni bloc as a threat to its own regional hegemony, so they've started constructing a rival northern tier alliance with Iraq and, surprisingly, the Kurdish autonomous regions in Syria. It's a total reordering of the map where you have two distinct indigenous power blocks staring each other down, with the US reduced to a glorified arms supplier rather than the regional police officer.
It's basically the end of the Washington Consensus in real time. And while those guys are busy redrawing the borders, the global economy has pulled a fast one on the entire region. My next prediction is that by this time next year, the oil weapon is officially a relic. We're going to see Brent crude trading at $58 a barrel. And here's the wild part. It'll stay there regardless of how many missiles are flying across the Persian Gulf.
$58? Corn, the Strait of Hormuz, is still a choke point. How do you decouple the price of oil from a regional shooting war?
You change the plumbing. In June 2025, right after the ceasefire, the International Energy Agency triggered the Strategic Reserve Release Protocol. It wasn't just a temporary tap, it created a permanent 30 million barrel per day overhang. They effectively flooded the zone to break the back of wartime inflation, but the real structural shift happened in August 2025, when OPEC Plus effectively dissolved. Saudi Arabia and the UAE both refused to participate in further production cuts because they realized they needed the cash flow to fund their new defense pact and their internal Hormuz bypass pipelines through Oman.
So the cartel is dead because the members realized they'd rather have market share than high prices during a transition era.
Precisely. The geopolitical premium on oil has evaporated. Investors have looked at the 2026 war and realized that even a direct conflict between the world's biggest producers couldn't keep the price above $80 for more than a week. By 2027, oil is just another commodity, like copper or wheat. It's no longer the pulse of global stability, which completely strips Iran of its biggest piece of leverage. If you can't crash the global economy by threatening a tanker, you're just a fragmented regime in a desert with a lot of useless crude.
Which brings us to our final joint prediction for April 2027. If the US is just the arms dealer and the oil weapon is broken, who actually sits at the head of the table? It's the Beijing Consensus. By this time next year, China isn't just buying the oil, they are the primary external power broker in the Middle East.
It's a total flip. While Washington was busy moving 18,000 Marines around and trying to manage the Netanyahu exception, Beijing was writing checks for the reconstruction of Karg Island. They've basically subsidized the Chinese fortress model for Iran. If you're a regional leader now, you don't call the State Department to settle a border dispute. You call Beijing because they're the ones who can actually guarantee the trade flows.
And that has massive implications for anyone listening who's looking at where the capital is actually moving. If you're a tech investor, the old SaaS and AI play in the region is getting a heavy dose of reality. The real money for 27 is in defense, adjacent cybersecurity, and, specifically, long-duration energy storage.
Right. Because if the Hormuz bypass pipelines are the new regional arteries, you have to protect them. We're seeing a surge in what I call hard tech sovereignty. It's not just about software anymore, it's about the physical infrastructure that keeps the lights on when the proxy wars flare up.
There's a specific shift in the risk model here too. For any business with Middle East exposure, you have to throw out the old country risk handbook. We're moving into an era of fragmented sovereignty. You aren't just dealing with a central government in Tehran or even Beirut anymore, you're dealing with multiple power centers. The IRGC factions, the regional defense blocs, and the Board of Peace advisors.
It's a messier map, but strangely, it's a more transparent one. You don't have to guess what the Washington Consensus wants anymore because they aren't the ones holding the leash. You just follow the pipelines and the Chinese credit lines. If you can navigate that fragmented landscape, the opportunities in the Negev and the new Saudi tech hubs are actually bigger than they were before the war. You just have to be comfortable with the fact that the old rules of global policing are officially dead.
That's the real kicker though. Does this fragmented, multipolar Middle East actually represent a new kind of stability, or are we just looking at a higher functioning version of managed chaos? By April 2027, we might find that the Islamabad truce wasn't a resolution at all, but just the moment the world accepted that the old borders and old alliances don't apply anymore.
It's the new equilibrium, right? Everyone's a little bit bloodied, everyone's a lot more guarded, and nobody's waiting for a superpower to fly in and save the day. What's wild to me is that the conflict in 25 didn't actually create these trends. It just acted like a massive atmospheric accelerator. All the stuff we've been tracking for years. The decline of oil as a strategic cudgel, Israel's pivot toward regional defense blocs, Iran's internal factionalism, it all just got compressed. We lived through 10 years of geopolitical evolution and about 11 days of kinetic war.
It's a sobering thought. The map has been redrawn, and not just with ink, but with fiber optics and pipelines. Whether this is a durable piece or just a very expensive pause in the action remains the big open question for next year. But for now, the Netanyahu exception and the Beijing consensus are the twin pillars of the reality we're navigating.
Well, if you're still trying to find your bearings in this new map, we'll be here to help you trace the lines. Thanks as always to our producer, Hilbert Flumingtop, for keeping the gears turning behind the scenes.
And a big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power this show and allow us to dive into these deep dives every week.
This has been My Weird Prompts. If you're enjoying these explorations, the best way to help us out is to leave a quick review on your podcast app. It really does help new listeners find the show.
We'll see you next time.
Take it easy. This episode was produced using Google Gemini 3 Flash. Text-to-speech by Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My weird prompts, that's the close from sloth, from man, from long-eared host. My weird prompts, until next time, stay curious, keep weird.